Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning at our monthly coffee hour for June. My name is Callie Bain. I am the brand new community engagement strategist over here at CultureWorks, and I'm joined this morning by Scott Garka, CultureWorks president, Mary Burris, our advancement and grant strategist, Aaliyah Harrison, our marketing communication strategist, and Daniel Jones, our Tri-Cities program manager. Just to let you guys know this morning that this Zoom will be recorded. So just for consent purposes. And also if you want to go back where we normally put these on YouTube later, if you want to mine some gems or miss anything, you can go back and watch that or share that with some friends. So for anyone who might be unfamiliar with CultureWorks, we are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to strengthen artists and arts and culture organizations across the region. We achieve this by a number of different things. We provide an annual grant program to further initiatives by artists and arts and culture organizations. And we also have a fair bit of non-grant programming to include this monthly coffee hour session, a quarterly networking mixer that we offer, and of course our signature Arttober VA, a month-long celebration of the arts, just to name a few. So if you are unfamiliar or want to learn more about what we do, I definitely encourage you to visit our website. That's richmondcultureworks.org. Follow us on social media. Aaliyah is killing it with all her posts. That's CultureWorks RVA. And sign up for our newsletter that where we showcase our arts and culture events happening around the region. So I want to introduce to you our speaker for today. Douglas Powell, artistically known as Roscoe Burnems, is a spoken word artist, poetry slam champion, comedian, published author, educator, father, and Richmond, Virginia's inaugural poet laureate. He has dedicated his craft to entertaining and educating. Roscoe uses his platform to be transparent and transformative. Using vulnerability as a superpower, he weaves through storytelling and metaphor, seamlessly guiding audiences through a range of emotions, but always ending with empowerment, love, and resilience. And we are so lucky and grateful that he took some time out of his early morning to be with us today. So thank you, Roscoe.
All these years, you would think I would learn how to work a Zoom call by now. Thanks for having me. I'm really, really excited to be a part of this. So I guess we can get into this. I would be remiss if I didn't start off with a poem, since we're going to be talking about poetry and career and this craft that I love so much and how I've turned it into a career. So quick poem, and then we'll get going. Cool. This is normally where I would get an audience to be like, say word, and then the audience would say word, and then we would go. But that's not happening, at least not right now. I'm sure you're saying word at home behind your screens. Thanks, Callie. When my favorite poet said that spoken word was the art of getting to know God for a living, what I heard was art will reveal the reality of God. Spoken word, psalms of today, songs of yesterday, poised pain in prose, scripted tablets to Facebook pages, pages of prayer pasted blogs, pontificated performed pieces of God's agenda. I never believed that God had a gender. I think that God is art, purest form of self-expression, love and love with the idea of thus making self-creation, the great I am, finished into a complete sentence structured to conjure images. I don't think that God is a poet. I think that God is poetry, evolution and haiku, immaculate conception conjugated by consonants and vowels, the all-knowing all spark of alliteration transformed, transcending formations. Leads me to think that even my trans fam be trying to get closer to God the way we all are. Like, ain't we all made in the image of God? Ain't poetry all about imagery? Who is anyone to say that the poem they see in the mirror isn't the poem they were meant to be? But if God's got a gender, well, then God must have a race. Now, I could race to conclude that God is black and looks like me. But if God looks like me, how can God look like you? I told a white woman I saw God in her. And she said she saw the same God in me. I don't think that God is a painter. I think God is paint, graffitied portraits of divinity, a mixed media mastermind mastering itself as a craft, crafting neon neo pastel personalities, a sketch of the future, visions of a sketchy past, fingers paint brushing problems on blank paper so we can draw our own conclusions. But listening to our own voices, we sing out segregation and broken down in the beginning to a sample and a soundbite, remixed into religion, a pale skin and beard, or a dreadlock rock star prophet, Allah and autotune, Christ chopped and screwed by man, but God ain't no singer. No, God is a song written by dance and vice versa, verse and chorus, choreographed chords by pliés, life-saving cliches from stepfall change whose measures resemble meteors, whose silent meditations sound like melodies, whose started time with a tick-tock like metronomes, popped in a pulse, locked us into life, and put the world on its axis from a clockwise backspin. God is a four-part harmony, heard from four corners of the earth, an R&B run over a rock ballad solo with a guitar made of stars who simultaneously boom bap the Big Bang Theory. Our creator, whose art is heaven, hallowed be thy frame, thy kingdom sung, spun into Genesis. God is art, and we are its masterpiece. Poem. I love the silent clap. So I'm Douglas Powell. I go by Roscoe Burnems. I wish I had a really great story behind that name, but I don't. Roscoe started out as a nickname. I threw Burnems at the end because I thought it was cool, and I was 17, and so that's how we got here. And so I've been doing poems ever since. I am 20 years into this career. From starting off at the open mics to now, performing at universities and colleges and traveling internationally, which is fantastic. But how does that happen, right? How does that happen? So a bit of an origin story. So I always loved poetry. I always loved storytelling. It didn't matter if it was music, poems, comedy. I fell in love with stand up probably around the same time I fell in love with poems and songs. I just love the ability to watch people tell a story and do it in this creative and unique way. And so poetry was what really grabbed me. And I had a teacher my junior year of high school take a look at some of my stuff. It was one of the few teachers that I really felt comfortable sharing my work with. And she was like, "You're really talented. You should do more with this, right? Keep writing, keep performing. Find these things called, these open mics and share your work." And so I took that and I ran with it. And so after graduating, I was looking for every open mic night, every poetry spot that I could find. So and that's kind of where it started for me. I didn't know it could be a career just yet, but I watched other artists as I traveled more to local spots here in Richmond. One of those being Tuesday Versus, which is the longest running open mic in the city of Richmond. I found a home there, and Tuesday Versus was kind of like the Apollo for particularly for poets, right? Like if you were good, and the crowd loved you, that means you were really onto something. They didn't, they were gonna tell you. So this is where I kind of cut my teeth at being, becoming a blossoming performer and writer. And that's where it started, right? So there were all these events that I would go to, pay to get into, or events that were free, just to get some time on the mic, just to get some time in front of an audience to share whatever I had. At some point, I was like, okay, well, I'm watching like other artists who come through and feature, artists who were traveling, kind of passing through Richmond. They would have books. They would have CDs at the time, for whoever remembers a compact disc. They would come through and they would perform, and then they would sell whatever merchandise they had. And I'm like, oh, you can do more with this, right? You can do more than this and just perform at an open mic and then leave. You know what I mean? So I was like, well, I want to do that, right? So I saw the framework for that, and tried to figure out a way to make it my own. And so eventually, like in my cousin's closet, we recorded an album, a poetry album, and we burned it. This is really telling my age. We burned we burned it on CDs, and I would write the name of the album on the CD, and I would go to like Tuesday Versus and all these other open mics and sell my CD for like $5. And that was the beginning of calling myself a career artist. I'm really pushing these CDs out of my backpack at every open mic that I could get to. And so then, for a while, it was just stuff in the city, stuff out in the counties in Henrico and Chesterfield, wherever we could find an open mic. And then we traveled more, right? We started going to like DC and Maryland, where there was a really thriving poetry scene, to try to get ourselves known. I say ourselves because it was me and a group of friends who were kind of starting out the same way that I was. And it was super helpful, right, to have that kind of support system and have some camaraderie in the art form. Doing it alone is tough, right? But when you got people supporting you, it makes it just a little easier. So that was the beginning stages of it. So we would go to these events in DC. DC actually has this spot called Bus Boys and Poets, and they have like a bunch of locations. They do open mics there, like every day of the week, pretty much, at all the different locations. And so we would, if we couldn't, if it wasn't an open mic in Richmond, then we were headed to DC, right? If it wasn't an open mic out there or an event, then we were headed down to like Charlotte or Raleigh, North Carolina, where they had some events going on. And so visibility, right? As an artist, you want to have as much visibility as possible. You want to be seen, because that's how you grow an audience. That's how you grow fans, followers. That's how you grow a network, right? It's because it's bigger than just getting people to follow you on social media. It's connecting with other artists and other people who have the ability to create opportunities. Um, so so we would travel as much as possible. We would just hop in a car, all go in on gas, and get to wherever we could. And so that continued for a long time. And then about a year or so later, that was like, shucks, that was like '07 to like '09, right? Um, from there, I was approached by a um, a poetry based variety show called Lyric Ave. So shouts out to Craig Watson, who runs that organization. And they were putting on these really big shows, right? They were putting on these big shows where they would have these, funny sketches, and they would have poetry features come down, and they would have people writing poems together and performing together. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And he was like, well, do you want to be a part of the cast? And I was like, yeah, I would love to, right? Like I wasn't going to turn it down. And that was like kind of this like level up for me. Right now I'm getting to perform at the Hippodrome. I'm getting to perform at Bird Theater and these like larger shows, larger audiences. So I'm performing more and I'm writing more. Uh, and then I learned about these things called poetry slams. A person who saw me at an open mic was like, there are these things, these competitions where poets get on stage and get scored and all that kind of stuff, and there's prize money and there's other opportunities. And I said, at first I was very like hesitant. I was like, I don't want people judging my art. So I was very anti poetry slam for about a year before kind of giving in and giving it a shot. And then I fell in love with it, and I'm very fortunate. Um, because poetry slams was a way for me to, one, increase my visibility, put me in a whole different arena with a whole different network of people and different artists, and allowed and really pushed me as an artist and as a performer, because this is the place where you're getting scored, you're getting judged. It's American Idol for poets, so you're you really have to bring your best, right? And it taught me a lot about what works on stage. It taught me a lot about crafting an experience, particularly in a short amount of time. It really pushed me as a performer. And then I was really fortunate enough to be on some teams and to be in some spaces where we were winning, right, and bringing back some national titles, and that being able to put that on your resume speaks volumes, right, and it kind of launches you up to the next level of your career. And so that continued for a really long time. Actually, I still compete in poetry slams. I send a team now to poetry slams, just because I want to give other artists that same opportunity that I had. And I think that was like the kind of the next level for me after being a performer for so many years. I was like, well, how do I create more platforms for artists? That was the next stage for me. And so that led me into doing more workshops with youth and adults, writing workshops, performance workshops. Like, how do we start to build up new artists? How do we support artists who have been doing this for a while and are looking to level up their own career or do more with their own writing? I've been doing this for so long. I'm like, okay, well, I want to see other people who love this craft as much as I do. Like, I want to see people do more with it. And so I got into a space where we were starting to create more events, create more workshop spaces, and create a community of artists. And that was a huge mission. It was a big part of my mission statement as an artist. I think when we're talking about building whatever art you love into a career, it's about finding all the avenues where you can exist. And so I'll talk mainly about poetry because that's the craft that I've really fallen in love with. But I think you can do it with pretty much anything, right? Um, the longer I got into this, it was bigger than just performing on a few stages, right? You realize how poetry can exist in all these things. Like, if you're a storyteller, you're a storyteller at the end of the day, right? And which means you can tell your story in a myriad of ways. You just try to figure out where that looks like for you. Because honestly, performing and touring will only really get you so far, right? And it's also really exhausting, right? I love being on the road, but also being on the road is tiresome. I have 3 kids at home. It's tough being away from them. So being on the road honestly just really wasn't sustainable for me. And so I did that for a number of years. I was actually a blossoming artist when I had my first kid, and she would go on the road with me. She would go to shows. We would be up and down the highway, driving to all these different gigs, and it was fun for a minute. But it's she also got school in the morning, so you can't do this but for so long. So it's not sustainable. I mean, it may be for some people, but I think that for the most of us, there's got to be other things, right? And so that's what led me into teaching, and doing more workshops. One, because I wanted to kind of gift this craft to new artists and emerging artists, and I wanted to build more community and fellowship and network and see a community blossom within this. But also, like, it helped pay the bills, right? It was consistent, doing workshops with schools and residencies. Brought in a consistent, consistent cash flow, if you will, without having to constantly like be away and jumping on a plane, every other week, right? So it created another lane for myself, right? Anytime you're like an entrepreneur, especially if you're an artist, multiple streams of income is huge, right? Like, that's what's going to help pay the bills consistently, right? So it's like, well, how many lanes or what kind of lanes can you exist in, or how can you use your craft in all these other different ways outside of what we just think that exists for artists, right? So from there, I've been doing. I'm still a teaching artist. I still work with a number of schools, school districts, doing poetry, using poetry in all these different ways, right? Whether it's poetry as a therapeutic process or poetry as a way of expressing identity. Like, we work with a lot of the organization that I'm with, that I created, the Writers Den, works with a lot of like BIPOC youth, a lot of LGBTQ plus youth. And so we talk about identity a lot, you know what I mean? And we talk about all these things, these challenges that they may face, and how do they express themselves through this very vulnerable art form that we've fallen in love with. So touring is a big thing for me. I just released a new book, and so I've been on the road off and on, doing workshops. It is a large part of what I do, and then we found some other spaces. We've collaborated with muralists to collaborated with some muralists to do to add a spoken word component. We teamed up with Mending Walls a few years back. Shouts out to Hamilton Glass, and the Mending Walls project, which was fantastic. And we were like, oh, let's add a component to this. Let's add a spoken word component to this. So there are these things called ekphrastics. Ekphrastics is a type of poetry that is designed to give a voice or explain some type of visual art, whether it's a sculpture, a painting, mural, whatever. And so I was like, when I told Hamilton about this, one, I had to explain what an ekphrastic was, and then after after that, he was like, "Oh, this sounds great." And so we teamed up together and we added a spoken word component to that. We found some grant money to make it happen. And we put together this really, really dope project, which is still on their website, by the way. Also on some of the QR codes that are attached to those murals that are around the city. So a lot of collaboration work, right? And a lot of grant writing, a lot of collaboration work and a lot of grant writing, because things got artists have to be paid, materials have to be bought, and so we have to find ways to do that, right? So fundraising is one thing, right, to be able to get the community involved, but writing grants and finding money in these other places is going to be huge for your career. I think I saw something in the chat. Somebody said, "What's the name of the book?" The new book is called Define, DEFYNE, DEFYNE. And you can find it on my website, which is roscoeburnems.com. There's also a link in my on my IG, on my social media, which is at Roscoe Burnems. And I'll follow up and say that again later. So a lot of collaboration, a lot of collaborative work, which is some of my favorite work to do. A lot of teaching. I worked in education even outside of poetry for a really long time. So just being in a classroom working with youth was something that I loved anyway. And so I was like, well, how do I combine these two things that I love, right? And I think that's really important just as an artist, right? It's like, don't limit yourself, right? We may love whatever art that we are really invested in, but you also have other talents and other skills and other things that you enjoy. And so like, how do you start to kind of blend those things to create maybe like a new lane for yourself or a way for you to stand out? So I say that to say like, some larger projects that we did even outside of the book or outside of touring or whatever, we released a film. And the film is called Traumedy, Traumedy. It's a poetry and comedy special. So it's a 1 hour set of poetry and comedy. It's centered around mental health, which is also another thing that I was very, very passionate about, just getting more people of color to talk about, depression and suicide ideation and, bipolar disorder and just how all these things that kind of can affect our lives that we aren't really having conversations about, right? Like getting Black men to talk about therapy is like pulling teeth. So how do we start to open up these conversations and how do I use what I love in order to create these difficult conversations and make it a little bit more palatable for people. So I love comedy. I've always loved comedy, and I've been doing poetry for a really long time. So I was like, well, how do we blend these worlds together? So we came up with a very like entertaining and very enlightening project. In addition to that, so like, how do you think outside the box, right? When you're an artist, if you're doing the same things, a lot of times you're gonna get the same results. So you're gonna have to take some chances. You're gonna have to take some risk and try something a little different than what you normally would, right? Something that's a little outside your wheelhouse, or something that maybe no one else has done. No one had ever put a poetry and comedy special together, let alone get it onto a major platform like Amazon Prime. And so we were the first, and we didn't know how this was gonna go, right? We had a very small budget, and we worked with what we had, and we made it happen. We put out what I think was a quality product, and it got received really well, right? And so that's the benefit, right? The risk, the reward definitely matched the risk, right? We tried something new, and it paid off. And I will say this about larger projects or projects that can be, projects like this that are a little scary or a little risky, or you don't know kind of what to expect from it, right? Traumedy is a great film. Please go watch it. Please go watch my film. Uh, Traumedy was a risk. It was really, really great. We put a lot of love and a lot of work into it. But I'd be lying. And then there are some residuals from that, right? There's definitely some residual income from that, from the streams. Amazon will cut me a check every once in a while. Listen, it's not, listen, Amazon will cut me a check for like $40 because there's no money in streaming. Every once in a while, Amazon's like, hey, you want this $20? You know what I mean? Like this, it's very informal. But what I will say is that, again, visibility, right? Traumedy led me to a lot of other opportunities. Traumedy led me to a lot of other opportunities because it was almost like I jokingly say it was the best business card I ever created. When people wanted to see my work, when people wanted to see my work and they were like, well, where can we find you? You know what I mean? And like, yeah, there's some stuff on YouTube, and yeah, you can go to my social media, but telling people that you have a film on Amazon was a huge step, right? And so people are now able to, kind of go and kind of see you when they want to, or take a look at your work. And it led to, performing at a number of universities or coming to a handful of mental health conferences, right? To talk about how we use art as a therapeutic process. So you never know where some of these things are going to take you, right? And it may not be this big payout right away, but it's really just kind of setting up the building blocks to do more with the craft that you're in. So thinking outside the box is huge. Trying new things, new endeavors, blending some of the things that you love, the passions that you have together to create something new, and then taking advantage of almost every opportunity uh, that you have is a staple or staples in your career as an artist if you plan on taking it to the next level. Right. A lot of times we get into the stagnant part. At least I know I did, where it feels like you're making a lot of moves and things are happening, and then you kind of hit a wall, and you're like, well, what's the next step? What's the next step? And sometimes we're looking um, to kind of like look around to kind of see what that is. Well, what's everyone else doing, right? Which is helpful for a while, especially when you're just getting started. But you get to a point in your artistry where you have to kind of make whatever that is for yourself. You have to kind of create those things for yourself, because you have to figure out your voice is unique, your art is unique. You got to find a unique way to present it and get it to the people. So I met a so since then, so that was 2020. Because I haven't been really like putting like a timestamp on any of this. Traumedy dropped in 2020. And by that time I'd also had a couple of books out. And then the college circuit, that was the next step for me. So there's these things called NACA and APCA. I have applied to both, and nothing came of it. So NACA is the like National Association for Collegiate Activities. I forgot what APCA is. It's APCA. But basically, artists go and they go to do these showcases. If your showcase goes really well, schools will book you to come to their schools and perform. Right, a lot of bands, a lot of poets, a lot of comedians do it. As far as like trying to book a tour, it works for some. It did not work for me. It was actually quite an expensive lesson that I learned along the way. And I think it's really important to talk about the failures as much as the successes, right? Because not every opportunity is going to work out. Not every opportunity is going to lead into something, but you don't know that, right? Until you try. And so I won't say be proud of your failures as much as your successes, but just know that they're just as important. Because you learn from those experiences, and you learn kind of what not to do or what doesn't work, and knowing that helps you kind of get closer to what does work for you. So I had done NACA and APCA a couple of times. It just didn't go well, and that's okay. I was still able to do some colleges, and I was able to do it independently, right? So we were able to reach out to some universities, um, kind of give this kind of whole pitch, have some stuff that we could send them, have an idea of what we wanted to bring to that university. Hey, it's going to be themed around this. We think your students could use this. There had been some cold calling, but outside of that, outside of that, it was a lot of networking. Networking is huge, and I was very a long time, right? I don't want to go to these networking events. Sometimes I don't want to be really social at these different things. Whether it's some type of mixer or a showcase where there's other people performing. You know what I mean? Like, but going and being in these spaces and being more visible was really imperative to my career, right? If you want to be an artist, people have to know you exist. And the only way for people to know you exist is to be present as much as possible, as much as you can stand. I know a lot of us are introverts, and our social battery is low. We just want to make the art and go away. But you're gonna have to get out there, and you're gonna have to force yourself to throw in a few smiles and meet people and shake some hands and kiss some babies, because people have to the people have to likability and visibility is really really important, right? That's what's going to book you the gigs. um so nobody wants to support an artist they don't like, right? So so how you show up in the spaces is probably one of the most important things that I've learned along the way. Um, so yeah, so so after that, it's been really about like creating, not only like taking advantage of opportunities, but later in my career about creating those opportunities for myself, right? So we've created our own shows, we've created our own films, we've created, and so that is that's a whole nother talk, right? Because now you're talking about like when you're an artist, when you're an artist, when you're an independent artist, you are everything, right? You are marketing team, you are your travel agent, you are handling all the emails. You are your own personal assistant. You are absolutely everything. You wear many hats. And so it's just a necessary evil as you're emerging. I'm in a space now where I do have an agent, and I have a social media team, which is great because it takes a little pressure off me. But I mean that's only been within the last few years. Prior to that, it was all me, and and it's a lot. It's necessary, but it's a lot. But also, I said it to say, give yourself some time to rest and give yourself some space to like kind of like not do anything for a minute. I know I've been talking about being on the go and being as visible as possible, but burnout is very real. And if you don't give yourself some time to sit back and just be an artist or be nothing at all, right? And just kind of do nothing and take some time to get away, then it'll make you kind of resent this journey, and that's no good for you or the art. Um, so yeah, that's where I am at this point in my career, and those are some of the kind of the pillars of what has allowed me to be a full-time artist for so long. So if there's any questions at all, please feel free to ask. I'm an open book. There's been some things going on in the chat, but I haven't been like really looking at it because I've been just running my mouth. And Callie, if you have any questions or if there's anything I left out or, you know what I mean, like, let me know.
And I think and this is a conversation that I actually had recently with my sister, just as far as like, when you are establishing your career, how do you, like, what is the relationship, I guess, in your experience, as in trying to find people that are networking people versus community building people, if that makes sense?
So like, how do you know the difference between these different spaces or
Yes,
what's,
and and what are the better spaces for just meeting a community person that you can maybe collaborate with versus like trying to network to get to another place? What are the best places to go for each of those audiences, if that makes sense?
for me, they've existed in a lot of like a lot of similar spaces. Like you'll sometimes you'll meet people like for me personally, right? Sometimes you'll meet people at the open mic, people who just want to come and kick it. They may be artists, they may just be art lovers, right? They just may be lovers of the craft. And so you can meet people that way and just spark up a conversation and share information, get a business card, exchange social media. Sometimes it's been and I work in a lot of nonprofit spaces, so like if you see an event going on that you may have some interest in, right? Then let's say it's a festival or it's or if it's a particular nonprofit that you've been wanting to work with or their mission statement is something similar to yours, right? Like going and taking the initiative to go find somebody and meet them, right? Who's ask questions, who's in charge, who makes who makes the decisions. Asking questions will always get you answers. So go to all the places, ask all the questions, right? If you're looking to be in a certain space, right? Like you got to figure out who are the decision makers within that space, and get their information as best as you can, or find them on social media, send them a message. It's it's however you can reach people is the way that you need to reach people.
I'm wondering, you talked a lot about your travels and your touring, and you talked a little bit about the DC space for what you do, and I think a little bit Maryland. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, what it is about, kind of Richmond, Virginia being your home base. What's so special about what opportunities Richmond affords you, and what's so special about your performing your artistry in Richmond, basing it out of Richmond?
So I love, so I've had the opportunities to leave and move to like different places, but I actually really love Richmond as an art community. It's really eclectic. Um, it's really eclectic. There's a lot of passionate artists here that I've loved working with, and I love watching the scene kind of grow and change over the years, right? And the reason why that's important for me is that I always need art to kind of feel fresh. When it starts to feel stale, if you will, it kind of takes a hit at my own personal drive. But there's always something kind of new and blossoming in Richmond, right? It's like now there's a ton of music festivals and there's poetry festivals, which wasn't even a thing a few years ago, right? So I'm like, oh, we're doing something different now, right? And so now here's a new space where I as an artist can exist, or at least lend my talents or lend my time, and so that kind of reinvigorates me. And I think that those things are happening in other cities, but I think that Richmond's got this kind of like this type of art community where it's like quiet until it's not, right? There's this kind of like poetry is kind of like poetry, like spoken word, for example, or poetry slams and that kind of stuff has always been around. It's been around since I got into this art form, right? Which is around like how like '06, '07, right? But no, but it was a very underground thing. Nobody really knew about it, right? And so but then like the artists didn't stop, right? We just kept finding new ways to kind of insert these things into different parts of the city and until it blew, right? And so now I run the Writers Den. We put on a monthly poetry slam, first Sunday of the month. There's a few other teams and a few other organizations throughout Virginia, but two in Richmond, us and a group called Rich Inc. That have been putting on poetry slams for a while, right? And now we're at a point now where we have a sellout show every month. We have a team that has placed top 3 in the nation. We've been able to do shows where we bring in these different, poetry slam artists, spoken word artists, spoken word teams, to either showcase their work or compete or whatever. And people are attending in like record numbers. We're on, we do a big annual festival called the Food for Thought Poetry Slam. And so this will be our 4th one this year. We've linked up with the Museum of History and Culture. They saw the beauty in what we're doing, and they opened their space up to us. And we've been able now to like bring artists from all over the country and highlight some local artists that are doing a lot in the city and abroad. So it's one of those things where it's like we've been doing this forever, right? And then it's like boom, and then like here it is, and now everybody's like, oh, like look at this new thing. So I think there's something beautiful in that because it never really loses the novelty for me. And then the beauty in Richmond is that once people see it, people want to support it, and I think that is something that is unique to Richmond because I've watched other cities be very much like kind of crabs in a barrel kind of thing, or not be able to get the people in the city behind it. But we've been very fortunate. I've been very fortunate to see that not be the case in Richmond. People love art and they want to support the artists and they want to, they want to see it grow. And so I've watched them lend their time, their talent, and their treasure behind it to make sure that it continues to happen.
Can you talk a little bit about how, first of all, good morning and thank you for doing this. Hi, Roscoe. Can you talk a little bit about how not to devalue yourself? Like how what's the balance between, okay, I'm doing this for exposure and not allowing it to become exploitation and having to learning when to start to value your art?
Oh man, every artist's favorite word, exposure, right? Who doesn't love performing for exposure? um, it's my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing to do. Getting paid in exposure. So listen, the reality of it is when you're a new artist, when you're new, listen, you're gonna have to take some gigs. It's not gonna pay anything. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna put you on stage, they're gonna give you 10 minutes and you're gonna have to just rock out. And so that just comes, it's paying dues, right? It's paying dues. It comes with the territory. At some point, when you started to be more visible, you, I don't know whether, and whatever your metric is, right? You've done bigger stages, you've gained more followers, you've released a new project, whatever your metric is, and it's your metric, right? So whatever your metric is important. You get to a point where you're like, nope, you have to pay me. Plain point, you got to pay me. So what does that mean though? It's like, well, how do you charge for that, right? It's like, what is your time worth, right? You have to kind of sit back and determine for yourself, what is my time worth? I had to write the music, right? I had to compose this. I got to get the band together. All these things cost, right? I got to travel to this, whatever this show is, or whatever this festival is. Like, what is your time worth? You know what I mean? If you're an artist who is still working like maybe like a full-time gig while you're hustling up these shows, and you have like a 9 to 5 or whatever, do you have to take off work in order to go and do this gig, right? So all these things have to be accounted for. And once you determine what's the price for you that feels good for you, you have to stick to it, right? You have to stick to it. And more often than not, people are going to work with you. They may try to haggle you down a little bit, right? So I always tell people to have a minimum, right? If you're charging $1,000 for a show, right? And they're like, oh, our budget, we can only really do like 700. If 700 is your minimum, then don't go below your minimum, right? Get your asking price. But if you're gonna compromise, make sure you have a baseline where you're like, I'll never go below this or whatever, right? And stick to it. And it's going. And listen, more often than not, people are gonna try to meet you where you are. More often than not, but sometimes people aren't, right? They're gonna say, hey, we really think you're talented, but we can't afford you, right? And you're gonna have to accept that. You're gonna, not every show is gonna happen, right? Don't be so desperate for the show that you end up compromising your worth, because you won't feel good about it afterwards, right? And then more often than not, they're gonna remember. They're gonna be like, oh, Lucretia, she charged $1,000. I know she's worth it. We ain't have it last time, but next year when we do this festival, we're gonna make sure we're gonna get our money up, and we're gonna make sure that she's in the building, right? So those opportunities may come later. You know what I mean? I have a baseline, right? This is what I'll accept. I won't accept anything lower than that. And then either they'll take it or they don't, right? But more often than not they do, or they'll come back next time and say, hey, this is what we have to offer. Can you work with us? And we'll try to figure out something from there. It's very, very rare now, particularly in this part of my career, where I'm like, okay, I'll just do it just to do it. If I think that it's, if I think, me personally, that the gig is going to lead somewhere, it's going to lead into a bigger opportunity, then I may find some wiggle room. But but you got to stick to your guns. You got to stick to your guns. You got to stick to your asking price. Otherwise, you're just going to feel, I don't know if we can cuss on here, but you're going to feel shitty afterwards if you don't. So know your worth, right? And don't compromise it.
So I don't know if you said in your talk already, like when you started, if you had an ultimate end goal, like I'm going to do this because I think I want to get to this particular point. But how has that point changed from when you started to where you are now? Like has your ultimate goal changed from when you first got into this to where it is now?
Oh yeah, man. I've never had an ultimate goal. Like, there's always things I want to do as an artist. But just like the art is always growing, right? And it's always changing, right? Whatever you were creating 20 years ago isn't necessarily what you're creating now. My goals have always changed. You know what I mean? Like I'm like, oh, this was cool. Like you get to a point where you're like, oh, I did that. All right, well, now I want to try this, right? Now I want to try this, and now I want to try this, right? Because what happens for me is that once I'm able to like achieve something or kind of knock something off my list, I realized that like I had limited myself to this. I put myself kind of in a box. I'm like, oh, well, I want to go to universities. I want to start performing at colleges, and then you do it, and you're like, oh, what? It wasn't so hard. let's try this now. Like I want to create a show. I want to create a film. I want to get into advertising. I want to start working with companies and start doing advertising and doing commercials, right? I'm like, you start to see that the art really is limitless. There's no, I think that's the beauty really of being an artist, entrepreneur, is that there really isn't any cap or any like, there's no ceiling. The beauty in art is that there is no ceiling, right? If you can think it, then and you can create it. And so it's truly like really remarkable, because like as an artist, you get to now do whatever you want to, and go from there, right? It's an ocean, right? It's a vast ocean of opportunities.
Anyone else have any last questions before we wrap up this wonderful coffee hour? Anybody?
I've got one, but I want to give non-culture works folks a chance to ask questions. All right. So Roscoe, first off, I appreciate you sharing your successes and perhaps even more importantly, the importance of learning from those negative experiences. I think that's such a great life lesson. But my question goes back to early on. You talked about how you were not wanting to participate in poetry slams because you didn't want to see your work be judged. But eventually you got over that. And that's a huge step, I think, for a lot of people. I'm curious, how did you get over that?
I wish I could say there was a process for it. At some point, you got to just kind of put your, put your britches on and pull them up and just kind of deal with the possible rejection. You know what I mean? Like, and it's really a part of the art. It's a part of the art. It's a part of life, right? Like you're people. So here's what. Okay, I'll tell you what. Here's what I learned is that poetry slam or no poetry slam, right? People are always judging. People are always judging your work, right? Some people are going to like it. Some people are going to say, oh, well, you could have did that better. You could have done that differently, right? And whether they're saying it out loud or not, it's still happening, right? What poetry slams, what I ended up loving about poetry slams is that I can see it in real time, right? You do the poem and that judge gives it a 6, a 0.5, out of 10, and you're like, man, that stings a little bit. Like it was at least an 8 in my mind. It was at least an 8. So that happens, right? And it hurts, right? And I think that's a valuable lesson, because there's going to be some rejections, right? If you're a writer and you're submitting to magazines, journals, reviews, anthologies, you're going to get some rejection letters, right? And so you're going to have to be able to deal with that, because not every publication is going to want your stuff, right? No matter how great you are, and you may be extremely talented, but not every publication, it's not going to be a good fit for you. Not every opportunity is going to be a good fit for you, but you don't know that until you try it, right? Until you see if it is or not. And so you've got to be able to deal with those failures, because there are going to be a lot of failures. Just as an entrepreneur in general, right? There's going to be a lot of failures before you get to those big successes, right? Most businesses, particularly restaurants, fail within the first 4 years. I would argue that most artists do too, right? They want to go and they want to become these professional artists, and they go after it. They go really, really hard for a few years, and they don't feel like it's happening fast enough. Or they've dealt with some rejection. They didn't get booked for this particular thing. They reached out to some agencies, and they didn't they didn't pick them up. And so they get so discouraged so fast that they just kind of pull away from it completely. And it's like you have to push through it if you really want it. Then you're gonna have to push through it. My oldest kid is 17, and she's into fashion, and she's an artist, in her own right. And so she was just like, well, I don't know what to do with it. And she has some ideas, but I think she's more so about being scared to kind of go after them for the fear of them not working out. And so she's like, well, she's thinking about like other avenues, basically, if art doesn't work, right? She's like, if this doesn't work, then I got this plan B. I'll just, I'll go back into working into this or whatever. And I'm like, anything can work if you work it. Anything can work if you work it. If you put the work in and you're willing to pivot and you're willing to try and you're willing to fail and you're willing to get back up and you're willing to work something else out, anything can work if you work it. But if you stop, you're gonna fail if you stop. You know what I mean? Like, you can only succeed if you keep going.
Anything can work if you work it. Love it. Gonna be thinking about that one. Does anyone else have any final curiosities or anything for Roscoe before before we sign out here?
Leah, did you again? No accountant has ever said, if accounting doesn't work, I'll try art. I know that's right.
Hey, I'm an accountant, but
Yeah,
is
that
also
was
an
me.
actor. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Roscoe, for your time. I want to give you an opportunity really quick. I know we've dropped your social in the chat, your website, the link to Traumedy, your work. Is there anything else you have coming up or that you want to let people know about? You want to plug real quick?
I'm doing a couple of little local shows for some friends. So there's an event called Bad Thursdays. They really cater themselves to music, but every once in a while they bring in some poets to kind of come out and rock. They're at Vagabond, and that'll be at the last Thursday this month. So if you're local and you want to come in and see me kind of rock out, and there's gonna be a band there, it's really cool. It's a fun show. And then of course we do an event every first Sunday of the month. So if you've never seen a poetry slam before, or you have and you've been looking for a really good one to go to, we put on an amazing poetry slam the first Sunday of the month. I run an organization called The Writers Den RVA, so you can find The Writers Den RVA on all social media. But we're probably most prominent on Facebook and Instagram. Our Instagram is at The Writers Den RVA. I can't walk and chew gum. Sorry, y'all. So it's at The Writers Den RVA. So if you're on Instagram, if you're on Facebook, at all, we post all of our events. We post all of our events there. So we have something coming up. The first Sunday in July. And that is actually going to be our Pride Slam. So shouts out to all the LGBTQ homies. We're going to have a slam dedicated to for queer poets who want to come through and rock. That is July 7th. July is Black Pride Month. We were going to do something in June, but we were out of town for a competition, so it just didn't work with our schedule. So we're doing it in July. So come out and see that, and then our official slam season for people who want to make the team starts in August. So make sure you set aside first Sundays on your calendar for us.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it, and all the little nuggets of wisdom. And thanks to all of you who hopped on early this morning. It was so great to see so many faces, especially being present on camera. So we really appreciate that. We have another one of these next month in July with Reese Williams from In Your Ear Studios and Chakra Sessions Live. So you can go ahead and register for that, I believe, on our Eventbrite. And of course, if you missed my little spiel in the beginning, make sure to follow CultureWorks on Instagram and sign up for our newsletter so you can stay up to date with all the arts and culture things happening around Richmond and the Tri-Cities, and stay up to date with events like Roscoe's that he just shared. So again, thank you all so much. And